Hello everyone, so this is the second video of Unit 3.2 on exchange rates, and in this video I'm going to discuss the causes of changes in exchange rates. I will describe the factors that lead to changes in currency demand and supply, including those things over here. I won't list them all because I will actually explain them in the video. I'm going to distinguish between the depreciation and appreciation of a currency, and I'm going to draw diagrams to show changes in demand for and supply of a currency. So the IB economics syllabus requires you to describe the factors that lead to changes in currency demand and currency supply, including number 1, foreign demand for a country's exports. If the demand for your country's exports increases, the demand for your currency will increase. So let's assume this is the market for US dollars. If the demand for American exports increases, foreigners will want more US dollars, so the demand for US dollar will increase. The US dollar will appreciate. That means its value will rise. Okay? The second factor is domestic demand for imports. If US residents and citizens increase their demand for foreign imports, they will go and they will purchase other goods and services from overseas. By doing this, they are increasing the supply of the US dollar. In this case, the US dollar will depreciate, its value will fall, and obviously the opposite is true. The third factor is relative interest rates. If there's an increase in US interest rates relative compared to European interest rates, for example, more Europeans will want to save and invest in the United States. By doing this, they will increase their demand for the US dollar, which will cause the US dollar to appreciate. The opposite is true. If there's a fall in US interest rates relative to interest rates in Europe, more Europeans will want to save and invest in Europe, and more Americans will want to save and invest in Europe, which would lead to a fall in demand for the US dollar by the Europeans and an increase in the supply of the US dollar by Americans, which will cause the US dollar to depreciate. The fourth factor is relative inflation rates. If there's a rise in US inflation rates relative to European inflation rates, there will be an increase in the demand for imports by Americans because now foreign goods and services are cheaper, and there will be a fall in the demand for exports by foreigners. The increase in the demand for imports by Americans will increase the supply of the US dollar on the foreign exchange market, and the fall in demand for exports by foreigners will decrease the demand for the US dollar. Both of these will cause the US dollar to depreciate. And the opposite is true. If inflation rates are somewhat lower relative to European inflation rates, more foreigners will want American goods and services, and Americans will not import as much, which again would cause the value of the currency to appreciate. The next factor in the IB economics syllabus is investment from overseas countries. If more foreigners come and invest in the United States, whether it's foreign direct investment like multinationals or portfolio investment like stocks and shares and bonds, the demand for the US dollar by foreigners will increase, which will cause the US dollar to appreciate, and the opposite is true. The last factor is speculation. If speculators predict, so they just predict that the US dollar will appreciate, they will buy more US dollars. And so the demand for the US dollar will increase and the US dollar will appreciate. Okay, speculators actually have a lot more power than we give them credit for. If they speculate that the value of a currency is going to fall, they start selling it, which increases the supply of that currency and hence causes its value to actually fall, causes it to depreciate. So some key terms we have to define. Appreciation is an increase in the value of a currency in terms of another currency. It is caused either by an increase in the demand for that currency or a fall in the supply of that currency, or both. So for example, if one US dollar used to be 0.8 euros, 80 cents, and now one US dollar is worth 0.9, that means the US dollar is now more expensive for Europeans. Its value has appreciated. Now, if you flip that coin, that means the euro relative to the US dollar has depreciated. And this brings us to depreciation, which is a fall in the value of a currency in terms of another currency. It's caused by either a fall in the demand for that currency because foreigners are not demanding it as much, or an increase in the supply of that currency because local citizens are buying more goods and services from overseas, or both. So here's an example. If the US dollar used to be 80 cents, euro cents, but now the US dollar is worth 70 euro cents, it's now cheaper for Europeans to buy the US dollar. We say that the US dollar has depreciated against the euro, which means that the euro has appreciated against the dollar. So here's an example with diagrams. Again, you have the price of the US dollar in terms of euros on the vertical axis and the quantity of the US dollar on the horizontal axis. Let's assume there's a rise in interest rates in the US relative to the EU. So the demand for US dollars comes from Europeans. That they would increase the demand for the US dollar because now more Europeans want to save and invest in the United States because of these higher interest rates. At the same time, US citizens, the ones who supply the US dollar, would rather save and invest in the United States rather than in foreign markets. So that actually decreases the supply of the US dollar in foreign exchange markets, both of which, this increase in demand and the decrease in supply, would cause the value of the currency to appreciate. So the US dollar used to be, for example, 80 euro cents. Now it's worth 90 euro cents. Let's have a look at a different example. Let's assume there's a decrease in European demand for US exports. So Europeans are not really demanding as many American exports as before. You can see that this leads to a decrease in the demand for the US dollar by Europeans, which causes the value of the currency to depreciate.